This is long, but without a doubt the most unexplainable creepy thing that's ever happened to me. June last year, a man from Pakistan began messaging me on Facebook. Assuming it was a scam account, I ignored his attempts at conversation and thought little of it. 6 months later, the random messages started to pop up again, several times a day, with personal information about me he couldn't possibly know. Every day for almost 4 months, the stranger wrote to me, knowing details about my life that I'm certain aren't on Facebook. He knew where I'd worked, where I lived, my phone number, the brand of smokes I buy, how I'd become unemployed, my parents separating, and my daily routine. I'm not easily spooked, but he was trying to get under my skin, and it was working. I told a few close friends who were skeptical at first, figuring he'd gotten my information off of Facebook, until they read the message thread for themselves and could see how serious it was. Of course, I considered the possibility an acquaintance of mine was behind the account posting as this man. Unfortunately, the timeline dated back to 2012, had hundreds of photos, check-ins with family and friends on the other side of the world, and appeared legitimate. He intimidated me for months, dropping facts about my life every now and then to scare the shit out of me. Finally, he explained he wanted to come to Australia, and if I helped him, he would pay me. At first, I was amused that he thought I could be of help, making a joke of his idea. He obviously didn't appreciate my response because he started mentioning my dad and sister. I was more angry than scared by that point and decided to contact the National Security Hotline. I figured if this individual was willing to pay a stranger on Facebook to worm his way into Australia, they'd want to find out why. They also didn't think I was batshit crazy, so that was a huge relief after all the looks others had given me. A few days passed after the call. The messages continued, but I had peace of mind knowing I'd reported it. Maybe I had overreacted, maybe I was batshit crazy, or perhaps one of my friends was behind it all. Obviously, the authorities weren't taking the situation as lightly as I'd thought, because the detectives turned up at my home to get the story from myself firsthand. As bizarre as the situation was, it was comforting knowing that they had listened and had my best interest after being made to feel like an idiot for months. The messages stopped the same day I spoke to the detectives at my house, giving me reason to believe action was taken when they left. I'll probably never know the details, but it's probably best that way anyway. Anyway, not the usual creepy story you read in these threads, but I won't be forgetting my encounter anytime soon. Probably my entire life could count as a disturbing, scary story. My mother and grandmother were always extremely protective of me as a child. I grew up forbidden to visit family or friends, walk down the street, go outdoors by myself, or even cook or drive. It got worse and worse as I grew older. I was 19 and my mother forbade me from having a job. She told me that I had everything that I needed right there, with her. I didn't need money. I decided that enough was enough and saved up some money from doing laundry and finding change around the house, swiping what I could here and there, and I had to hide it well. She would steal it from me if she found it. She said that all the money was hers and hers alone. I packed my bags one day and tried to leave. She actually tackled me to the ground and dragged me back inside with my grandmother's help. Had my phone reported stolen and took it from me so that I couldn't make calls, and slept beside my bed to make sure that I didn't sneak away. She took me to a church meeting one day, holiness, and had the demons blessed out of me for 3 hours solid. No one would help me. She had them all convinced that I was nuts and needed help. She even recruited a cousin on my next attempt weeks later, when I actually got a bus ticket, to come and trick me into her car. Cousin told me that she was protecting me, helping me, but she wanted to talk to me first, shut the car door on me, and after I got in, it had a child safety lock on it. They drove me home and kept me isolated for a solid year before I could get help. Some of my relatives even parked their cars in the driveway for a while to keep me from leaving. I finally got away after I gained her trust back over time, got access to my phone again, and was able to get in contact with the guy that I knew. Really nice guy who I was strictly forbidden from talking to. He was the devil. Seriously, she called him multiple times and told him that he was a devil and needed to be rebuked. He promised to help me get out. This was hard because she wouldn't even let me get an ID or anything, claiming that I'd use it to leave her. We couldn't contact the police. She once told them that she had papers somewhere that said I was in her custody and I was mentally insane, and they left me with her. Freaking Alabama. He, combined with a more trustworthy cousin, managed to help me save up some money in secret and sneak out to a waiting taxi one day in a grocery store. Guy and I flew to Idaho, where he had some family willing to help me, teach me how to drive and live on my own, and I haven't looked back since. Now I get daily calls, messages, and texts from my mother saying that I'm killing her and my grandmother, that they're dying without me. Funny thing is, I've seen pictures of her and she looks like she's lost half her body weight. She's a walking skeleton. Bonus, I found out later that she had access to nearly every account that I've made online for anything and has been stalking me for years in secret, sometimes using my name. She's also tried multiple times since I left to get into my PayPal account, but it locks her out and sends me a message. I was going out with two of my guy friends one night, and we were planning to just walk to the bar. About a quarter of the way, we realized it was too cold and we should grab a cab. There was a cab sitting in the parking lot of the Royal Farms right there, so we went up and tapped on the window. The cabbie appeared to be taking a nap. He woke up, motioned for us to get in, so we did. He pulls out of the Royal Farms lot into the lane, with traffic going in the opposite direction that we were moving. Then he starts weaving back and forth throughout the lanes in an S pattern. Luckily, there was no traffic coming in the opposite direction. We asked for him to stop and we'd just get out there. I was in the middle seat. We came to a stop at a red light and the boys both hop out. As I started sliding over to get out, the cab driver took off, running the red light as I'm desperately trying to hold the door open with my foot. I figured that if that door closed, he'd lock it and I'd be locked in and his prisoner. I'm screaming my head off and still holding the door with my foot. The guys are running as fast as they can behind the cab while throwing whatever they can at it. He then decides to swing right and smashes into 8 cars that were parked along the side of the road. This was also the side where my leg was holding the door open. Luckily for me, there was another red light and a car stopped in front of us. I couldn't get the right door open, but was quick enough to get over and get out of the driver's side. As soon as I rolled out, the light changed and he took off. The guys were only able to get a very blurry picture of the tag, and we couldn't make out the numbers when we called 911. My leg was okay, just badly bruised, and I have no idea if they ever caught up with the guy. Hands down, scariest experience of my life. I didn't think I had anything really creepy to post about until I started reading through these and read something similar to an experience I had. It started around my sophomore year in high school. I began getting creepy text messages and phone calls, but never really thought much of them since in those days prank calls was a common thing to do. The messages and calls would come in constantly for weeks, then would stop after a while. I honestly would forget they had even happened until they'd start back up again. Around my junior year, the calls began getting creepier. They would call my house number along with my cell phone. This was around the time that cell phones were starting to get popular, so while some of my older friends still had my house phone number, it wasn't something I would give out to people anymore. When I started dating, they began calling my then boyfriend and would tell him awful things about me, and sometimes even know where I was at the time, and ask him to question my whereabouts. It caused a lot of issues between us, but again, they would stop after a while, and apart from wondering who it could be, I never thought much of them again. Fast forward to college. I stopped talking to a lot of my friends from high school, even deleted my old MySpace accounts, and cleared friends from Facebook because I wanted to have a fresh start. Was still dating the same guy, but really stopped having contact with most people I knew from high school. Halfway through my freshman year, the calls and text messages started again, this time with even more personal details about my life. Like always, right before I considered them serious enough to report, they would stop, and I would slowly forget they'd even happened. Sophomore year, I moved out of the dorms and into an apartment with 3 girls I'd met the year before. One night, I started getting the usual texts again, but this time they were threatening to Photoshop nude pictures of me to send out to people I knew. I tried ignoring them, but the text wouldn't stop. I would block one number and they would come in from a different number almost immediately. I got really creeped out and decided to change my number the next day. At this point, I was not sure who it could be, but I had become paranoid and stopped trusting anyone except my boyfriend. I isolated myself from friends and began going into a depression. I sometimes was sure it was so-and-so from high school, but could never come up with proof of anything. Fast forward a few months and I'm at a concert with my boyfriend. He got drunk that night and we'd gotten into a huge fight over it. I was home with my parents that weekend and got home around midnight. Around 2 a.m. the calls to my house phone started coming in. Yes, we still had a landline. One after another we were getting calls from men asking for my sexual services. We tried blocking calls, but like before it was just different numbers one after another. Finally, we just unplugged the phone. The next morning I had to explain to my parents what had been going on for years, and together we made a report and changed our landline number. Turns out someone had put my phone number on Craigslist and listed me as a prostitute. By now, I began realizing that my boyfriend had been the one constant during most of these incidents, and that our drunk fight that night could not have been a coincidence with my number being posted on Craigslist. It took a few tries for me to leave the relationship. He was very manipulative and I spent years isolating myself from friendships and trusting only him. I finally left him that summer and chose to forget all of these things that ever happened. It took me a while to be healthy enough to start dating again, but when I did, I met a wonderful guy who is now my husband. I mentioned what had happened to me before, but thankfully was emotionally distant enough from it that we just commented on how awful that had been and moved on. Last year, however, I began getting text messages again. I had a new phone, new number, new friend circle, blocked anyone associated with my ex-boyfriend, trusted the people in my life not to hand out my number to anyone, so I was so scared when it started again. Thankfully, this time I had my wonderful husband with me. After it happened a few times where I would get text messages only when I was with my husband, and the text messages insinuated that I had been cheating on him, we decided that we weren't going to take the chance that this was a coincidence. We hoped that we weren't being followed, but the timing and content of the messages were obviously meant to cause a fight between my husband and I. We decided to make another police report, this time citing my ex-boyfriend as the suspect, and limited the number of people who had my number even further. Since then, I'm so happy to say that I have not gotten any unknown calls or messages. The detective assigned to my case attempted to contact my ex-boyfriend, but he was never able to. In any case, I think that he realized that this time I was serious about pursuing legal action against him and he stopped. I was lucky that this was the case because technically, I did not have any proof that it had been him. Anonymous harassment is actually really difficult to pursue legally for many reasons, so thankfully approaching him was enough to make it stop. When I think about this experience now, I realize how disturbed and manipulative that guy really was. I have no proof that the prank calls I got before I met him were him, but if I think about how I met him, it all looks so planned to me now, even though then it seemed like a Nicholas Spark movie. I hope that those calls were coincidence, but I'll really never know how far this guy went with his stalking of me. I'm just glad to be out of that relationship and to be emotionally healthy again. I'm always late to these threads, but I've got a good one that incorporates the true monsters around us. A couple of years ago, my boyfriend and I went on an impromptu road trip. We packed up the car and the dogs and drove up to far northern California redwoods. I was somewhat familiar with the area from the time I was a kid, and it seemed very adventurous just heading out without a true destination in mind. A couple of nights in, we ended up meeting up with a friend of a friend, grabbing some drinks, and she invited us to crash at her house for the night. We happily took her up on the offer because it saved us from dropping money on a motel or trying to find a camping spot. She lived in a super cool looking old Victorian house. Our friend normally had 6 roommates, including several guys, but since it was summertime and most of them were students, it was only her and another female roommate, plus us, for the night. We drank some beers and hung out and went to crash. Both roommates were upstairs, and my boyfriend and I with our dogs were crashing on a futon downstairs in a room that was right in the front of the house, off the front door. It was kind of a sitting room with a fireplace and big bay windows looking out to the front yard, which had a good cover of bushes. We both fell asleep easily and were in deep sleep until we were suddenly awakened by the doorbell ringing. Now this is an old Victorian, so it has an old school deep ringing doorbell that you hear throughout the house. One of the residents of the house came down and opened the door and looked out and saw nothing. So she went back upstairs to bed. My boyfriend and I thought it was kind of weird, but not our house. Maybe late night visitors were common. We fell back asleep and then were awakened again some time later by the doorbell. We heard the roommate come down again and look outside the door and shut it. This time, she walked into our room after and asked if we heard the doorbell, and we could tell she was weirded out. We told her not to open the door if it happens again, and all came to the conclusion that it must be the doorbell malfunctioning or something. The roommate goes back upstairs and we fell back asleep. Next, I wake up to one of my dogs growling the most deep-throated growl I have ever heard from him. He absolutely loves people, even if they are strangers, and we live in the downtown of a pretty major city, so having him growl at something at night is not normal. We chalk it up to being in an unfamiliar house and tell him to be quiet. I fell asleep again. Next thing I know, I wake up with my boyfriend jumping out of bed and literally smacking the big bay window about 5 feet away from my bed and yelling. There's a man's face standing in the window staring at us. My boyfriend immediately grabbed an axe, since we had been camping, it was right at hand, and chased this guy down the street. I'm sure whoever that creep was must have shit his pants. The whole commotion woke everyone up and we stayed up the rest of the night keeping guard. The scariest thing to me is that the guy was probably casing the house. If he wanted to rob it, there's no reason for him to ring the doorbell multiple times. He wanted to see if it was only the girl's home, depending on who came to the door. Still gives me chills to this day to think about it. I was about 12 or 13 years old when this happened. One time, I was walking to my psychiatrist's for my weekly appointment. It's a half-hour walk and after dark. I enjoyed walking, especially after dark when things were quiet, peaceful, and slow, and no one else was around. No, I didn't live in a dangerous neighborhood, nor did I walk through one to get to my psychiatrist's. As I'm about halfway to my destination, a car, a Cadillac, comes driving down the street. Some people, both male and female, in the car are sticking themselves out of the windows and are taunting and jeering at me. A bunch of people in their late teens or early 20s. I ignore them and keep walking. About a minute or two later, the same car comes down the street again, and those people are taunting me yet again. I don't know who they are. Maybe they live in the neighborhood. I still ignore them and keep walking. Another minute or so goes by again. They come driving down the street. Now I'm worried. They're circling the block over and over, deliberately focusing on me. As soon as they reach the corner and make their turn and are out of sight, I duck behind some bushes in someone's front yard and wait. The car comes again down the street. They pass right by me in my hiding place and turn the corner. I think they think I've finally reached my destination, one of the houses on the block, and as a result, they drove away. I thought wrong. Stupidly, I leave my hiding place and go back to walking on my way to the psychiatrist's. I should have stayed there behind the bushes much longer because I hear the car approaching. They spot me and start taunting me again. They turn the corner. This time I run towards my destination, but I know I won't get far before the car and those kids catch up with me again. So I decided to hide again behind the bushes in front of an apartment building. This time resolving to stay there for a good while until the thugs in the car give up on searching for me. I'm hiding there behind the bushes for about 30 seconds or so when the guy whose apartment it is pops out, asking what I'm doing hiding in his bushes. At first, he probably thinks I'm a burglar or something, but I explained to him how I'm walking to my psychiatrist's and how I'm being followed and harassed by a bunch of kids in a car, which is why I'm hiding in his bushes. The guy can instantly tell from the tone of voice and my facial expressions that I'm telling the truth. He can see how scared I am. Just then, the car comes down the street and pulls right up at the curb directly in front of us. They look at me and the guy I'm with. Not a mean-looking guy, in his late 30s, early 40s, but tough and serious looking. He's wearing a sleeveless shirt, which reveals that this guy's upper body is very well toned, slightly muscular. I'm looking at the car and I realize that it's missing a few people inside. The car doesn't look full now. The guy I'm with just gives them a mean stare. He asks me, "You know them?" I explain that no, I don't know them at all. I haven't the slightest idea of who they are. Just then, as the car is sitting there, about 3 of them approach, walking from the other direction. The car was traveling east to west. Those 3 were walking on foot from west to east, so that's why the car seemed emptier. They were looking to escalate the situation. They weren't satisfied with just driving by and taunting me. They changed tactics. A few of them got out of the car up ahead and started walking towards me, while the ones in the car took another turn and around the block. Their plan now was to physically trap me in between them and their car, perhaps grab me and drag me into the car with them for whatever reason. But seeing my tough guy guardian angel with me, the kids walking towards the car instead got into the car and took off. The guy offered to stay with me for a little while longer, or if I wanted to duck into his apartment to stay there until I was sure that it was safe to continue my journey. I had a feeling that this was the last I was going to see of those guys and their car, and I didn't want to be late for my appointment. So I thanked the guy for his offer, but declined, and decided to head on my way. The guy went back into his apartment and closed the door. I looked at the closed door and hoped that I hadn't made a mistake by turning down the guy's offer, because I was still scared. Thankfully, I was right about not seeing the car again. The rest of my walk was peaceful. I reached the psychiatrist's office. I told my therapist about what had happened. He insisted on calling the police. The police came and took a report from me. That's the last I heard of it. On my way back home, I usually took the same route that I came from, up the same streets. But this evening, I changed my route, taking some different side streets. I never saw the car or those thugs again. I came home late one night when I was about 17 and the rest of my family was already in bed. I go to my room and just do typical stuff before bed. Work on my homework, talk to my friends on the phone, listen to music. Finally, go to bed a couple of hours later and nod off. I'm awoken by some rustling under my bed, but assume it is my cat and just roll over and go back to sleep. A short while later, I'm woken up again. I laid there perfectly still and quiet and listened to the noises. This was when I realized that the noise was coming from an animal much larger than any damn cat. Since I lived near the woods, my imagination started running wild. Was it a rabid raccoon, a sinister skunk, a crazed coyote? It took me about 5 minutes to work up the courage to peek under the bed and try to figure out what I was dealing with. I slowly rolled over and glanced down the small gap between my mattress and my bed frame and saw the scariest thing I've ever seen. It was a hair-covered arm of a man. My heart started racing and I felt like either vomiting or pooping my pants. I knew I needed to run, but all I kept thinking of was that this diabolical murderer/rapist was going to slash my Achilles tendon as soon as I stood up and my ankles were within reach. I finally gathered the courage to leap from the bed and make a dash toward the door. This is when I realized that it was actually possible to be so terrified that no noise comes out when you scream. I made it to the door and was running from the stairs up to my parents' room when I was grabbed from behind and a hand clamped over my mouth. Long story short, once the guy started whispering for me to be quiet, I realized I knew who it was. It was a guy I'd been on a few dates with. He was trying to apologize for scaring me and said he didn't mean to, and that he just wanted to see what I was like when alone. Hysterical me started crying and telling him to get the fuck out of my house. Dude had the nerve to ask me to give him a ride home. No? A couple lessons learned. My parents sleep like the dead and do not wake up even when their child is near murdered in the basement. Sneaking into a girl's house and hiding under a girl's bed is not an acceptable way to learn more about her. Also, I may be too nice and understanding. In hindsight, I think I should have called the cops on this guy, but instead just told him to leave me alone and not talk to me anymore, because my parents told me that he seemed like a nice boy who just made a bad judgment call. However, this incident still haunts me years later. It seemed really scary to me. Hello everyone, your favorite Margbot here. Hopefully the only Margbot you know. If you've made it this far, you may want to continue on down because the video is technically not over. I threw in what you could call 2 bonus stories that I was very intrigued by, I guess you could say. I'm really curious to see what you guys think about them. I almost didn't warn you guys that I was going to put these in here, but I was afraid I might upset some people because of the nature of the stories, and you'll find out what I mean once you listen to them. Also, I guess this is technically my 1,000 subscriber video, so here you go. Ta-da! I made it slightly longer than my usual videos. Hope you enjoy. Put a lot of hard work into this, and as always, please leave likes, comments, and share. And we've grown so much, you guys. My God, I couldn't have done it without you. I think that's all I have for now, so Margbot out. Love you all. I'm in my room, sitting in front of my computer, working late at night as usual. I have to go pee, so I head out the door. I'm staying with family for a few weeks, so I try to be super quiet to avoid waking anyone up. To get to the bathroom, I have to go around a sort of left-handed U-turn. I've stayed in this house for a month or so, every year for as long as I've been alive, and I've done a lot of midnight pees, so I know the way by heart. I go out the door, take a few steps, left turn, few steps, left turn, down the hall and into the bathroom. I turn the light on in the bathroom, do my business, turn the light off, and start making my way back towards my room. I don't want to turn on the hall light at this point, again to avoid disturbing family, so I'm basically blind. I feel my way down the hallway, right turn, few steps, right turn, and then suddenly, holy fuck, I swear I saw a shadow or something move. I stop dead and listen as hard as I can, still totally blind. Nothing. So I take another few steps and I swear to God I saw a shadowy figure move towards me. Directly towards me, out of the solid wood door to my room. I stop again and feel panic start to set in. This is the creepiest thing I've ever experienced since childhood nightmares, and I used to have some pretty fucked up ones, like that my dad was trying to kill me. I'm not imagining things. I definitely saw a shadowy thing moving towards me in the dark. I take one step towards my room, close enough to the door to grab the handle, and the shadowy, creepy as hell thing moves toward me again. It's getting bigger every time. It's right in front of my face, inches away, but I can't quite focus on it. I start to seriously freak out. I actually consider calling for help. Sleeping family be damned. And that's when my nose bumps into the mirror that hangs on the wall next to my door, at a 90-degree angle to it. Turns out I got totally disoriented and never made any second right-hand turn. The end. When I was about 8 years old during recess at school, I noticed a bunch of other kids outside a storage room yelling and warning to others not to approach the door because there was an eyeball staring right back at you. I was curious because I didn't understand what they meant, but I could see their fear was real because their faces were pale white as they would try to deter me from taking a peek through the keyhole. I remember bending down slightly so I could get a closer look inside, and sure enough, there was an eyeball staring back at me, and it freaked me out so much I peed my pants on the spot. It was only later in the day, after I had ended up at the nurse's office because of the commotion us kids had created, that a janitor had to go into the room to inspect what this whole mess was about. Turns out that someone had placed a mirror against that door, and the eyeball we were seeing was our own reflection.